I never thought my biggest enemy would be a woman obsessed with mailbox regulations. But here we are. I live in a quiet, suburban neighborhood, the kind where people keep their lawns trimmed just enough to avoid getting dirty looks from the HOA. It's a nice place, or at least it was before I crossed paths with Karen. She wasn't just any HOA president. No, she was the kind who treated every minor rule like it was federal law, and every homeowner like they were under her personal control. If a kid left their bike in the driveway for too long, warning letter, a car parked half an inch over the line, immediate fine. She lived for it. At first I thought I could stay off her radar. I paid my dues, followed the rules, and kept to myself. But then I made a mistake. I decided to renovate my pool. Nothing crazy, just updating the tiles and adding a few modern touches. It wasn't even against the HOA rules. I double-checked the guidelines, got the permits, and even let the board know ahead of time. I thought I was in the clear. I was wrong. Somehow, this simple renovation turned into the issue of the year for Karen. She voted against it, claiming it would disrupt the neighborhood aesthetic. I didn't take her seriously. I mean, it was just a pool. But looking back, that was the moment everything started spiraling. At the time, I had no idea that my small home improvement project would turn into an all-out war. And I definitely didn't expect it to end with flashing police lights in my driveway at 3 a.m. I had been thinking about renovating my pool for a while. The old design was outdated, the tiles were cracked, and the pump made a sound like it was summoning a demon every time it turned on. After a successful year at work, I finally had the budget to fix it properly. Nothing extravagant, just new tiles, some updated safety features, and an energy-efficient pump that wouldn't drive my electricity bill through the roof. I wasn't changing the size or shape of the pool, just making it look nicer and function better. Since I lived in an HOA-run neighborhood, I knew I had to play by the rules. I read through the guidelines, filled out the paperwork, and submitted my renovation plans. I even included material samples and a digital rendering to show that it wouldn't be some flashy, over-the-top project. The HOA board reviewed everything, and most of them gave it a thumbs up. But there was one problem. Karen. Karen wasn't just on the board. She was the board, at least in her mind. She took her role as HOA president way too seriously, treating every minor decision like a Supreme Court case. When my renovation came up for approval, she was the only one to vote against it. Her reason? The color of your tiles doesn't fit our neighborhood's aesthetic integrity. I thought she was joking. She wasn't. Apparently, the soft blue shade I had chosen was too Mediterranean for our traditional American community. I pointed out that several houses on the same street had blue trim, but that didn't seem to matter. The rest of the board overruled her, so I figured that was the end of it. I scheduled the construction crew and got ready for the upgrades. Big mistake. Because the moment the work started, Karen decided this wasn't just about a pool anymore. This was about power, and she was about to make my life a nightmare. It started with a letter about my grass. According to the HOA, my lawn was exactly 1/4 of an inch too tall. Not half an inch. Not an overgrown jungle. Just slightly above some invisible, arbitrary limit. I mowed it the same day, thinking that would be the end of it. Then came the mailbox violation. Apparently, my perfectly normal mailbox, the one that had been standing there for years without issue, was now unsanctioned. No explanation. No warning. Just a fine. When I checked the HOA guidelines, there was nothing about it being a problem, but that didn't seem to matter. Next, it was my car. One morning, I woke up to another notice. I had parked 6 inches too far from the curb. 6 inches. As if I had committed some kind of high-level parking crime. And then came the best one. My security cameras. A citation appeared in my mailbox stating that my cameras were too visible from the street. Mind you, The HOA handbook explicitly allowed security cameras. But Karen had suddenly decided that mine were an eyesore. It became a pattern. Every few days, a new letter. Another fine. Another absurd rule being bent just enough to justify harassing me. It got to the point where every time I saw an envelope in my mailbox, I felt like I was receiving a ticket from the universe for existing. I tried to be reasonable. I knocked on Karen's door, calmly asking why I was suddenly getting violations left and right. She gave me that fake, syrupy smile and said, "Oh, I don't make the rules, sweetie. I just enforce them. We all have to do our part to keep the community beautiful." That's when I realized the truth. The HOA rules were never the problem. The problem was that Karen was the rules. Karen's petty games weren't enough for her. She wanted a war. The first attack came as a surprise. My pool renovation was almost done when I got an email. "Emergency HOA meeting. Your pool violates Code 7.3.2. I had read that handbook cover to cover, and there was no Code 7.3.2. But when I showed up to the meeting, Karen acted like it had always been there. According to her, my new depth markers were in the wrong font. Yes, font. And that meant all work had to stop immediately until the board reviewed it. That review, of course, wouldn't happen for another 6 weeks. Then the city inspector showed up. Some anonymous resident had reported my construction as unsafe and potentially damaging to neighborhood infrastructure. The inspector looked around, checked the permits, and found nothing wrong. But Karen had done what she wanted. Delayed everything. Every extra day of stalled construction meant more stress, more money spent, and more power for her. It was like dealing with a passive-aggressive Batman villain, except instead of crime, she fought against good landscaping and personal happiness. That's when I decided to fight back. I started documenting everything. I saved every letter she sent. I made copies of the HOA bylaws and compared them to the ridiculous rules she was suddenly enforcing. I even took screenshots of her emails, some of which contained thinly veiled threats about understanding my place in the community. And the best part? My new security cameras caught everything. Every time Karen parked across the street, watching my house like some kind of suburban surveillance agent, it was recorded. Every time she snuck over to inspect my property with a tape measure in hand, I had proof. At this point, I wasn't just dealing with an HOA president. I was dealing with a dictator in a pantsuit. It started with a noise, a low mechanical rumbling in the middle of the night. At first, I thought maybe my neighbor was taking their trash out or some late-night landscaper had lost track of time. But then my phone buzzed, motion detected in my backyard. I opened the security camera app and nearly dropped my phone. A cement truck was backing up into my yard. And right there, standing next to it in full suburban dictator mode, was Karen. She had traded her usual business-casual dictator look for designer athleisure wear, complete with a clipboard in hand, as if she was directing a home improvement show from hell. At first, I thought I was dreaming, because surely no one is this unhinged. But no, this was real. And there she was, personally overseeing the destruction of my $75,000 pool renovation. I scrambled to grab my phone and started recording. Because if I didn't, no one would believe this. Now, there were 3 very important things Karen hadn't accounted for. 1. A police car was parked just down the street, doing routine patrols. 2. My floodlights were very sensitive, and the second she stepped past my fence, they lit her up like a Broadway stage. 3. She was standing directly over an underground power line, one my contractor had very clearly marked. And then came the moment that will live in my memory forever. One of the cement workers, clearly confused but not wanting to lose a paycheck, hesitated and asked, You sure about this?" Karen, without missing a beat, snapped, "I have full HOA authority. Just start pouring." That was when Officer Rodriguez stepped into the glow of the floodlights. He had his hands on his belt, head tilted slightly like he was watching someone try to talk their way out of a very obvious lie. "Ma'am," he said, glancing at the clipboard in her hands, "this is a meeting agenda with some handwritten notes. This is not a permit." Karen's face went from smug to panicked in seconds. As soon as Officer Rodriguez called her out, she turned on the cement truck workers like it was their fault. "What are you waiting for? Pour it! Pour it now!" she barked at them. One of the workers, clearly realizing this job was way above his pay grade, took a cautious step back. "Lady, I ain't getting arrested for this." Karen let out this strangled sound, somewhere between a gasp and a growl, and started frantically typing on her phone. Even from a few feet away, I could see the contact name. Frank Urge. Before I could even process who the hell Frank was, the universe decided it was time for karma to arrive immediately. There was a sudden, sharp crack, followed by a burst of sparks. Karen had stepped right onto the underground power line. Half the street went dark. The cement truck driver cursed. The workers bolted. Officer Rodriguez grabbed his radio and called for backup. Karen? She just stood there, gripping her phone, blinking like she couldn't understand what had just happened. I was doing the neighborhood a favor," she finally stammered. "This pool is lowering our property values." Rodriguez rubbed his temples. "Ma'am, Mediterranean blue tile is not a crime." The moment I sent the security footage to the HOA board, everything unraveled fast. At first, they were just shocked. Then, they started putting the pieces together. One board member, who had always seemed nervous around Karen, finally spoke up. I knew something was off with all those violation fines. Turns out Karen wasn't just power-hungry, she was stealing. She had been embezzling HOA funds by issuing bogus fines, then funneling the money into a personal account. And that mysterious Frank URG she was desperately texting? Not a lawyer, not an emergency contact. He was a real estate developer. Karen had been trying to tank property values in the neighborhood so Frank could buy up homes for cheap. My pool renovation? It was never about aesthetic integrity. She just didn't want anything raising home values before their scam was complete. The board wasted no time forwarding everything to law enforcement. First, local authorities stepped in. Then it escalated. The FBI and district attorney took one look at the financial records and opened a full investigation into fraud, conspiracy, and property damage. Karen was arrested a week later. She actually tried to sweet-talk the judge, saying it was all a misunderstanding and that she was just protecting the community. The judge? He wasn't buying it. Bail denied. With Karen gone, the HOA finally got a much-needed overhaul. The board wasted no time putting new, transparent rules in place. No more one-person power trips. All fines now required full committee approval. No more vague, made-up violations. And best of all, no one would ever have to deal with a rogue HOA president drunk on power again. And my pool? Finally finished. After months of delays, sabotage, and cement-related crimes, the renovations were complete. To celebrate, the entire neighborhood came together for a massive pool party. Even the board members who had once been too scared to stand up to Karen showed up, margaritas in hand. As I floated in the water, I couldn't help but laugh. I really did make waves. Literally. And Karen? Well, karma didn't take long to catch up. She was sentenced to 2 years in prison. Apparently, she tried to start a prison HOA, demanding the inmates follow her ridiculous community standards. That lasted about a week before the guards shut it down. Her new nickname behind bars? The HOA Karen. As for me, I just enjoy my morning swims, knowing that the only thing Karen's in charge of now is the prison laundry schedule.